welcome to everybody gathered here today. We're united both in sorrow and celebration as we remember and honor the life of David Shander, a beloved member of our community, a cherished friend, and a treasured member of our family. In Jewish tradition, better? Yeah? Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. I can also speak louder. In Jewish tradition, we believe in the power of memory. We come together not only to mourn the loss of David, but to celebrate his life and the indelible imprint he has left on our hearts and on our lives. As it's said in our tradition, Zichroman livracha, may his memory be a blessing. So today, as we gather in this space, filled with love and remembrance, we'd like to acknowledge the complex tapestry of emotions that such a loss weaves through our lives. There's sorrow, yes, but also joy in the memories, laughter in the stories, and gratitude for the time shared. I remember David as a friend for many things. Perhaps most profound for me was his intense curiosity about everything. His relationship with community, with friends, and with family, the power of and the limits of the ability of man to heal, the marvel of humor, and the intense joy of a not very kosher egg McMuffin on a Sunday morning. True story. I had the privilege of experiencing David's deep love for family, his wife Karen, his three children, Elizabeth, his late daughter Katie, and Bill, and his 6 grandchildren, as well as his love and care for the larger community who've come gathered together here today. I miss our conversations. I miss our conversations about God and the meaning of life, about the frustration and the anger we feel about not being able to do more, about the joy and the silliness if we just let it in. My friendship with David was profound, and I suspect that I learned at least as much from him as he did from me. He was a blessing to me. He was a blessing to all of us. So as we come together to celebrate a life well lived and a life well loved, a life that continues to inspire us and guide us, even though David is no longer with us, today, let us open our hearts to the memories we share, to the stories that make us smile, and to the bonds that continue to unite us. I'd like to invite you to take a full minute or two in silent reflection, to sit with your memories of David, to feel his presence in your heart, and to silently thank him for the moments, big and small, he shared with us. Psalm 23 offers us this. In this journey of life, I am guided and cared for. I have everything that I need. I find rest in serene places where nature's beauty soothes my soul. My spirit is renewed. I am led along paths of peace and well-being. Even as I go through the toughest times, I am not overwhelmed by fear, for I feel a comforting presence within and around me. Even in the midst of life's challenges, I find reasons to be grateful. My life is abundant and full. Kindness and love accompany day by day, and I am at home in the world, surrounded by beauty and peace. I'd like to invite some friends and family to share a few memories of David. We'll begin with a message from Marty Rebeck and Peter Friedman with some reflections on growing up with David in Brooklyn. Ah, the sights of Denver, Colorado. Next, we'll be hearing from Dr. Larry Savet. Dr. Larry and David attended medical school together from 1957 to 1961 and shared many adventures along the way. They remained close friends over the years. I was delighted to talk to Larry this morning, and he reminded me that whatever we think we're doing in this world, whether in medicine or teaching or running an organization, everything boils down to relationship, 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 and community, community, community. Next, I'd like to invite up to the front Dr. William Schulten. Dave and Bill met at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas in 1964, where they'd been sent for orientation into the Army. They discovered that they were stationed together at Bassett Army Hospital in Fort Wainwright in Alaska until they were discharged in 1967. And though I'm not sure I believe in coincidence, Both chose Denver to build their careers and their families, but they continued their friendship over the years, right up until the end.
Hello, everybody. I first met David July 1964. David and I were draft eligible. We had the draft yet in those days when we were growing up. And we succeeded in getting enough deferments so that we could complete our specialties. And that was the way the Army and the military in those days staffed their hospitals. We ended up then in the Army Reserve, and I were called for active duty at that time. We met in '64 in San Antonio at Fort Sam Houston. And that was a month of orientation that we received there, introducing us to the various aspects of military life and getting our uniforms and et cetera, and understanding some of the military concepts. While there, I don't quite remember when I first met David. We were in a lot of lines, and we were always assigned alphabetically, so the S's coincided. And the first thing I remember meeting David, we had a kind of an interesting request from the colonel at San Antonio at Fort Sam Houston Brook Hospital. He had just come from Alaska and was reassigned there, and he saw, I guess, our names in the rosters and invited David and myself and maybe one other, I can't remember, but I sure remember David. And that's where I really first I got acquainted with David. After our introduction there, we were assigned to our permanent duty at Fort Wainwright, Fairbanks, Alaska. And we got there about mid-August. We finished the end of July with our orientation. We got I'd say we got about 2 weeks to get up there. And so we got started in our duties, the permanent duties there, and Dave and I saw each other frequently. We were assigned and had offices on the same floor. One of the things I thought was worthwhile bringing up about our experience there, it was pretty nice in Alaska in August. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but we had a awakening about Halloween of 50 below zero. And that was an experience that's very special, very different. The other thing about Alaska that is very remarkable is the days and nights, going from about 3 hours daily to night, and going from almost no darkness for a couple of months. So that's kind of an interesting aspect there. One of the things I thought I would bring up, not exactly with about David, but what we learned, our cars, we would have to plug in. We had electric outlets all over town, Fairbanks at that time was about 35,000. And later the oil came in, and that now the city is about 125,000. But anyhow, we would plug into this electrical, and what I learned is a couple of things. We had to keep our oil heated because it would become so viscous from that cold, it wouldn't flow. And the other thing that I remember, I had a little VW and came up there with normal tire pressure. And during that cold, if you know, your tires are just a little bit flat when you're standing still. Well, when I would get going, I would clump, clump, clump. And so how I got advised on that was we'd pump our tires up to about 60 pounds per square inch, 30 versus 30, just a little feature there that we could keep those tires perfectly round, because they would clump and break the seal and you'd have a flat tire. So that's another little thing about that time with David. David was out hunting. Hunting was a little like skiing here in Alaska. Hunting was a little like skiing in Colorado. If you didn't participate in that, you're almost un-American. And so David and I hunted, but David was on this hunt, and he came back and was talking to us, and he talked about how he saw this German Shepherd out there. So after we discussed that a little while, that turned out to be a wolf. So David was a good sport, just like mentioned on the other discussions. And then a couple of things that we did that I thought were kind of unique. We I would have to camp out once in a while to get a flavoring of what the troops went through during that cold weather. I kind of learned up in Alaska why Napoleon and later the Nazis had trouble in Russia because fighting up there is more keeping yourself from freezing to death than facing each other. And we had tents that were double lined. I've not seen any of those around here. And then we had a furnace or a little stove with fuel oil that would really put out a lot of heat, so we could handle the cold. And the other type of way to protect ourselves was with lean-tos, and the way that was pretty crude. We'd have to dig a trench and put tree branches and so forth in there and light a fire, and then we would sleep under the lean-tos. And so that was an interesting experience. We also had special training, David and I, in northern warfare at a little fort there called Fort Greeley, which was down the road about 100 miles. And there are a couple of little things which are all that different. We learned very important in Alaska to dress in layers. And of course, we hear that here too. But one of the things that you really had to be aware of is if you ever sweat in Alaska and you get wet, you're in big trouble. So that was very important. And so that was another little aspect there. We also, our way of dealing with the winters as far as marching and so forth with cross-country skiing. So they spent time with that with us. And so those are a couple of things. The other couple of things that I remember, David and I went to Japan together. David came through really big there. We had to get from Fairbanks to Anchorage, and then we would catch hops. Things were starting to heat up in Vietnam, and so we could keep on with this. They'd refuel there, and we could continue with them. And that we'd get off in Japan, where they refueled again before they turned their last lake. But anyhow, David saved us. We were wondering how to get from Fairbanks to Anchorage, and it just so happened that David was the physician for the general's wife. And she said somewhere in there, "Can I do you any favors?" David said yes. And he got us there on the general's airplane. So that's another thing with David I thought was really kind of a good David thing. David and I also, I remember David went on a bear hunt down in Valdez, Alaska. And that was the days before the oil pipeline. So it was just a sleepy little town, kind of on a fjord-like formation. And the military had a little recreation facility there. So David and I thought it's about 300 miles from Fairbanks. We thought we'd go on a bear hunt. The problem was neither one of us really knew how to hunt bear. And I kind of laugh at that now. But then what happened is David and I were exhausted and fatigued. We were coming back, and we were just a little ways out of Valdez. And here in the valley was a bear walking. And we had climbed this mountain and that one and didn't really know what we were doing. And here, so David took a couple shots, but it was a long ways away. I was kind of relieved because I thought if we would have gotten that bear, I don't know if I would have known what to do with it. So anyhow, those are some of my memories with David. They mentioned, I grew up in a little town of 1,200 in Iowa. We were pretty parochial and pretty provincial. So I found David a real enlightening figure in my life. It took me a long time to grasp that and to incorporate some of that. But I've always appreciated how he influenced my total outlook that I have today. And I wanted to share one little thing here. David gave this to me for my 70th birthday. And this was so I could remember him and remember our bear hunt. And I think Karen was there also. It was my 70th birthday, and I have this mounted on my mantle, and it's right beside the TV. And so every day I think of David. And so one other quick thing as I stand here, one other big event, Betsy was born in Fairbanks, Alaska, at Bassett Army Hospital. Betsy's over here, and I presume you're Bill. Oh, no, that's your husband. Yeah. So is Bill here? Okay, Bill. I remember, Bill, you were born here in Denver, but I remember you too. And my son was born at Bassett about I think you preceded him a little bit, but that's 50, about 50, almost 60 years ago now. So, but anyhow, that's some of my memories of David, and I really will miss him. I've got a lot of cherished memories of the different little things that we shared. One of the speakers mentioned I learned a lot about being more liberal and that sort of thing. And David was certainly a real advocate of that, and it's enhanced my outlook in life. And so I've really cherished a lot of these memories. I'll stop with that.
Thank you. We'll continue with a message from Dr. Philip Wolf. Phil is a retired professor of medicine at the University of Colorado Health Services Center and chief of clinical cardiology. 25 years before that, he and David were partners at the Rose Medical Center. They remained close friends after he left Rose in 1989. I'd like to invite up Dr. Dennis Baddock to share. He asked to be introduced simply as Denny, a lifelong friend and colleague of David's for more than 50 years.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Karen, for asking me to speak. I've known Dave since 1967. We both came to Denver at the same time, him from Alaska to start his cardiology fellowship, and I started a research fellowship in clinical pharmacology. The next year, I started a cardiology fellowship and was a year behind Dave. We had some wonderful times together. At that time, the cardiology groups each had 5 or 6 members, and you became very close with not only members of your own group, but those who were a year ahead of us. We trained under Dr. Blount, which was wonderful. But we were always looking for who can teach us and mentor us. Well, Dave, and no offense to the group that he trained with, I felt was the smartest of his group and the one best served to be a mentor to me. He really was wonderful. I thought he knew everything, which he really didn't. But one thing he did is in our fellowship, we had a very strong-minded boss, Dr. Blount, and he would teach us the ins and outs of what to do and what to not do to be in the good graces of our boss. At any rate, Dave then went on to private practice. I went in the military, so I didn't see him for about 3 years. I came back to Denver, was on the faculty of the university, and in 1973, I started private practice at Rose Hospital. I was competing against Lane Craddock, Bill Wolf, and Dave Shander, who probably never had any competition. I didn't want to be a thorn in their side, but actually over the years, we've had a very good relationship. We were all committed to teaching. Rose Hospital was the premier private practice teaching arm of the university, and the fellows in cardiology rotated between the VA, Denver General, the university, and Rose. And our mission was Dave and his group and me and my group and others to really provide an adequate teaching for the fellows for the future. Dave was really an icon in cardiology. I can't go through all his professional credentials, but a few of them, he received the gifted faculty teaching award. He was president of the medical staff at Rose Hospital. He was governor of the Colorado chapter of the American College of Cardiology, which represented all of the cardiologists in Colorado. Around 1990, his group split up and he joined our group, Aurora Denver Cardiology, and worked with us for 15 years before his retirement in 2005. Dave was a joy to have in a practice. As a colleague, as a mentor, the staff loved him, his patients loved him, and we had one added benefit. At all of our holiday parties, Dave would entertain us with all his jokes, including the famous pretzel hole. I'm sure you'll hear more about that from Abe later on. After he retired, he went on to other ventures, which you're going to learn about, but he never lost his zest and interest in cardiology. I retired in 2011, and Dave helped me organize and maintain a fellowship, an annual lectureship in honor of Dr. Blount at the university. And over the years, we kept touch. We had great times together. And my wife, Jo, and I cherished the times that we spent with Karen and Dave. Dave, you will be sorely missed. Thank you.
Next, I would like to invite up Dr. Michael Charchet. Mike, a retired cardiologist, was a student and mentee of David's beginning in 1969. After leaving the Air Force Academy Hospital, he and his wife Carol returned to Denver, where David held the place of role model, mentor, and dear lifelong friend. Mike?
I was tempted to tell the pretzel joke, but this is the wrong place. I love that Denny meant. Now I know another friend of ours, the late Dr. Jeff Michelle, first told me that joke, but now I know he heard it from Dave at Rose Hospital. Anyway, that's I'm gonna say. Thank you, Rabbi Grelling and Karen. I'm honored to be here and with this whole family who I've never met, but know a lot about. I met David in 1968. I traveled from Chicago, finishing my internal medicine residency at University of Illinois Hospitals. And I came for an interview. Carol she knew about Denver and always loved it, didn't join me, but David was assigned to show me around, to introduce me to the facilities, to meet people, and to prepare me to be intimidated by S. Gilbert Blount Jr., who otherwise known as the chief to most of us who went through those years with him at the university. I did get accepted for a 2-year fellowship, and I have to say that David, I sort of fell in love with him. He was gracious, he was kind, he was hilarious, and it's like he identified with my nervousness trying to get through this interview with Dr. Blount and looking over his glasses like this, and sitting behind his giant desk, and I got through it thanks to David. I was accepted during my fellowship. Dave and Dr. Wolf and Dr. Lane Craddock showed me real life cardiology like I really needed to learn in conjunction with the 3 university hospitals, university teaching hospitals that Denny mentioned. Denny and Dave were a year ahead of me in fellowship. And Denny has also been a friend for years. He taught me, the most impressive thing to me was his critical thinking and thinking outside the box, in addition to the academic knowledge. And I have to tell you a cute story. I'm not going to go into the medical details because there's not enough cardiologists in the room, but there was he was so wonderful when I would make rounds with him, but there was a nurse that came up to him with a monitor strip and asked him about a single beat on this strip. And apparently she had asked him the same question almost every day on rounds. And he said, I don't care. It doesn't make a difference. I never saw him ever. He was so good to the nurses and such a gentleman. And he just lost it. And as we walked away, he said, she asked me one more time, I'm going to go crazy. And it wasn't like that was a side of him that showed me how human he was. Because he was an idol that I'll never forget. We weren't close during my 49 years, the last 12 of which were part-time. I went from private practice to Kaiser for the last 35 years of my life. But I was always in touch with David, not only professionally at meetings and with what was originally the Colorado Cardiovascular Society, which became the Colorado chapter of the American College of Cardiology. And also, if I had a patient who left Kaiser for insurance reasons, I always referred him to David when he was at Rose, when he was in Aurora. And he often referred me patients when they changed insurance and came to Kaiser. So I was always in touch with them professionally. And then I would bump into him in various places like racquetball at the old Racket World, at the Symphony. And it was always a pleasure to see him. In 2008, Carol and I, my wife, bumped into Karen and David, and it was very nice seeing them. And I was in my first retirement before I went back to work. And and Carol said, and I said, boy, I've always loved David. And I remember Karen as a nurse at Rose. And I said, and she said, well, why don't you have lunch with him? And I never thought of that. And I did. And it started in 12 years of us getting to know each other like we never knew each other. And it developed into one of the most special friendships of my life. And then Carol and I had a special friendship with David and Karen that I so treasure. And at our lunches, I learned about astrophysics, and I learned Yiddish jokes, and I tried to develop the accent. I heard him perform at Temple Sinai with Abe Wagner. I don't know if he's here today, but it was one of the most hilarious shows, but he performed in many venues. And the other thing I learned about him, besides his wide range of interests and knowledge, was the resilience in a life so complex medically, and the things that he powered through as life went on, with his loving wife Karen always at his side. And Bill was so important in his healthy later years until that started to fail too, and he was on dialysis. My last time, I'm just going to tell you about my last time I saw him. It was in July. Actually, it was July 22nd. I looked it up because he died on July 30th. And he told me that day that he was going to stop dialysis, but it wasn't a surprise. It was with the knowledge of his loving family, his wife, and it wasn't a sudden decision by any stretch of the imagination. And I, of course, empathized. And on the Monday that he did make that decision, it happened that I had a lunch date with him, and I brought him his favorite tuna fish from Snarf's. And he took a couple of bites, and that's about all he could eat. He wasn't feeling well. And he said, then this is exactly what he said to me. He said, Mike, I must tell you, I'm going to have one more experience before I die. Rabbi Gorelick will help me consume mushrooms, and I'm sure it'll be one last adventure. Well, it didn't. That's another story, but the point is that that's who he was, living life to the fullest all along. I smiled and I gave him a kiss on the scalp like mine, because his beard was so scratchy. And I hugged him and wished him an easy time. And that was the last time I saw him. I have many more memories, but his life is a blessing to me. And I just have to once again echo the rabbi's words, may it be a blessing to all of us. Thank you.
So the rest of that story is, after we consulted with our doctor and found out that mushrooms get processed through the kidneys, if you're off dialysis and you take psychedelic mushrooms, you'll be tripping for a very long time. So we did not end up doing that. So it's my pleasure to introduce Hal Skeen. Hal and David were part of a team that met each Monday morning at the Museum of Nature and Science, putting together the new at the time Space Odyssey program. Of course, as things often seem to do with David, their friendship expanded outside of the museum and deepened into an enduring friendship. Paul?
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all and reflect on Dave, and because he was an important person to all of us. We met each other in Denver Museum of Nature and Science in Space Odyssey, which was relatively new at that time, which was good because there was always something new and changing, and Dave was always interested in what was going on. he was a great teacher. And the thing that made him a great teacher was he didn't tell people, he always asked questions. And I think that that was one of the things that made him, you know, special, because he always liked to ask questions. He loved to be with kids when they would come. Some of us went, oh no, not another kids' day, but Dave loved it. And at one point in time, kind of towards the end of the time I was there, the museum came up with this big square box. It was a frame. It had a flexible membrane in it. And the whole idea was to try to explain to people what gravity was really all about. And what you did was you held the frame and you put this ball on there, and as it rolled around, then you could tell kind of what gravity was all about. But it's still a difficult idea to get across to people. But he really loved that, because he liked to stretch people's minds and get them going. And we also, you know, our friendship expanded after the museum. And remember one time I got one of these little $2.95 flashlights that has 3 positions, and one of them is a little laser right at the end. So I called him up and I said, Dave, and by the way, he lived on the east side of Cheeseman Park and we lived on the west side, and our apartments kind of faced each other. But anyway, I said, Dave, let's see if you can see this little red. Well, I get out there with my laser, and all of a sudden he's, oh, enough. But anyway, you know, he was just a good friend, and he used to give me a ride home a lot of times, and we would talk. But I think the way he taught was such an important thing, to ask questions and not just tell people the answer. So I think as the dinosaurs did, they left their footprints. Dave's footprints will be around a long time.
To continue, I'd like to invite to the front Bob Hild. I spoke with Bob this morning, and he told me that his friendship with David needs no preamble. So with that, Bob.
Good afternoon. Interesting group. Let me start by saying that everyone prior to me has a long association and friendship with David. I do not. Okay. I only go back to 2011. And I'm grateful for that, because as a pharmacist and David as a physician, had I met him 30 years ago, we would have had a professional medical relationship. The fact that we were both retired when we met allowed us to just be friends. Okay, so you might ask, what does a pharmacist from a small town in Illinois have in common with a physician from New York City? Okay. One of the things that we talked about as we spent time at the museum was where did we come from? All right. And I had spent time about 35 years ago in Manitoba, where I built a pharmaceutical company there. All right. And David immediately said, Manitoba. I remember Minnesota, because when he would visit with Karen and her family in North Dakota and venture into Minnesota, he was fondly remembered by those who attended the Western Minnesota Thrashers reunion celebrations. And he would regale with the story of what is a Jewish doctor from New York City doing on a farm in Minnesota? Okay? And I was able to reply to that by saying, in the small town in Illinois that I grew up in, we also had a thrashers reunion each year and a plowing match where the farmers competed to see who could plow the straightest line, okay? Right? In addition to our conversations in the, shall we say, downtime at the museum, we often discussed Bill Maher's statement, "I don't know it for a fact, I just know it's true." Okay? So it fits lots of occasions. You can apply it anywhere you want. Every day, it'll come to your mind. I don't know if it's for a fact. I just know it's true. Okay? So we simply enjoyed each other's time and stories. All right. We talked over the last 12 years monthly. We got together for lunch. We got together for breakfast. And during the pandemic, we got together at a park in Denver and shared a thermos of coffee, also with our friend Wim, who is sitting here today. Okay. When David stopped driving, I would pick him up at the front door of his condo, and we would venture all the way down to Zorba's for breakfast. Okay. And one of the things that I enjoyed about that is that, like me, David didn't want to have breakfast till 10 o'clock, okay, because he enjoyed that early morning time without a commitment to get out, all right? So if you go to the very last opportunities that I had to be with David, we were in the process of setting up our next lunch or breakfast when David made the final decision that he did relative to the dialysis, okay? And we had gone back and forth playing phone tag for a couple days. And Karen called me to say that one of David's last wishes was a Nathan's hot dog, okay? So I jumped to the opportunity to provide the hot dog, okay? I can tell you that when you search hot dog restaurants in Denver, Colorado, who serve Nathan's hot dogs, you will get 12 answers, all of which are wrong. Okay? Because when you call and ask to speak to someone, they look at you or they sound like, what are you talking about? We serve whatever's on the menu, okay? So I went back to Karen and we decided that I should grill the hot dogs, bring them to David, and we would share them for lunch, okay? So 3 days before he passed away, I was the hot dog man, all right? And as I was in my yard setting to grill a package of Nathan's hot dogs, my wife and I and our neighbors had the opportunity to visit with the bear that was walking through the neighborhood, all right? So it was determined that it probably wasn't prudent to grill the hot dogs in the presence of the bear, okay? So I took my hot dogs to my son's house, who lives over on the east side of Denver. I grilled the hot dogs, took them to David's house, where Shander and Kat and Karen and I had a wonderful last lunch with David, embracing the joy of Nathan's hot dogs, okay? As it turned out, it was David's last full meal. So for that, I am truly honored, okay? David's joy of Nathan's hot dogs was certainly from his childhood. Nathan's hot dogs were only 19 years older than David, all right? Having been founded in 1916 on Coney Island, okay? I grew up in Illinois, and when you grew up in Northern Illinois, you eat Oscar Mayer hot dogs, okay? I didn't feel it was right to substitute my Oscar Mayer for David's Nathan's. All right. But I can tell you from this day forward, I am no longer an Oscar Mayer hot dog person. I am a Nathan's hot dog person. Thank you, David. I loved every minute.
Costco hot dogs. Next, I'd like to introduce Bruce Coy. Bruce and his partner Tanya were neighbors of David and Karen. Bruce described feeling an instant kinship with them, which, to keep with the recurring theme, led to a deepening friendship over the years. David and Bruce were delighted to discover another connection together through the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, or OLLI, at Denver University. Bruce, please join me.
Thanks, Rabbi Ben and Karen. When Karen and I and Tanya met a couple of weeks ago about this, we talked about how everybody who is going to speak about a different part of David's life is going to almost create a hologram of that. And I'm feeling that today. It's a beautiful sort of a look at a man through different prisms. And it's something that it feels good. Feels very good. So I'm also someone who came into David's life a little bit later on. I've known him for about 10 years, Tanya and I. And David Shander is the kind of guy that had an air of mystery when you first meet him. I met him at this high-rise condo building, and half of this room is filled with neighbors from the condo. So hello, everybody. Nice to have a reunion. But the first thing that I noticed was this car in the garage that had a custom plate, Lub Dub. I thought, well, who the heck would have that plate? What does that mean? Well, some of you know. It is the normal rhythm of the heart, Lub Dub. And that created a question about David. Who is he? He also had that patch over one eye, which Karen said recently that one of the things he loved was when the kids at the museum would come up and ask if he was a pirate. And he kind of went with that theme. You'll see in some of the pictures, I'm sure. He had a way of commanding your attention with carefully chosen words and humor. And that's something that's quite a special thing to be able to do. He also had, as we know, a fabulous wife, Karen, who was a bit younger than David. And he joked to me that as he got older, she kept getting younger. In fact, he said, when we got married, she was 12 years younger, and now she's 25 years younger. So that's David. David's words were so appreciated by so many after he retired. Instead of looking back at his accomplishments, he took a Renaissance look at science and other important topics. And he was obviously working at the Museum of Nature and Science, but he also was a facilitator at OLLI. And in his own words, David has always had an unswerving interest in science. I'm here to talk a little bit about David and OLLI. What is OLLI, you ask? Does anybody know what OLLI is? A couple people do. It's a program, it's a great program at Denver University that's been around for almost 28 years. And we offer academic courses for people 50 and better. You're our people. And we do these courses. I have to say I'm the marketing director, so one quick little advertisement is that tomorrow the winter term catalog is posted, so take a look. We have over 100 courses coming up that are going to be great. But during my research about David, I learned some interesting tidbits about his relationship with OLLI. As I look around these faces, as I said, a lot of the faces were from our building, and he was facilitating a course called Science Potpourri. And what I noticed when I looked at his proposal was that there were some names I recognized on his panel of presenters. One is David Maloney, who's in the room, who's a physicist. And the other was Captain David Beatty, who was an airline pilot. I guess it was a great program, very well remembered by the people who took it. He also taught many of his own classes about topics that were important to him, especially around the solar system. He taught about how recent discoveries changed our understanding of cosmology and astronomy. He thought big beyond just what he'd accomplished. And that was one of the great things about David. And as someone else said today, that his classes were not just lecture. It wasn't just a class you'd sit and get. He would ask questions. He would provoke discussion. He created an avenue for dialogue that very few people can do well. He did it very well. He also taught about the good and bad of our human cardiovascular system. I'm thinking the good news is that if anybody has an event in this room, we're in pretty good shape. You suppose. Every person who remembers David at Ollie does so with a strong sense of connection. When we learned he died, it was at a Zoom meeting, and I looked around at the Zoom boxes of all the Ollie managers, and it got very, very quiet. One person started sobbing. I'm about to. And as we talked, there was a sense of profound respect and appreciation of a man who gave back in so many meaningful ways. Thank you, David.
I don't know how many of you saw on the way in. There's a little box right by the sign-in book that has a copy of David's retirement speech in there. And so on your way out, I would strongly encourage you to take it. And it's beautiful. So on your way out, grab that. To continue, it's my pleasure to introduce friend and neighbor, Mike Wilson. Mike?
My last name's Wilson, so I'm used to being at the tail end of the show. Good afternoon. I'm Mike Wilson. David was my neighbor. David was my friend. When I was a school teacher, people would sometimes ask me what I did, and I told them that I taught children to read and write and all the rest. But my real goal was to develop lifelong learners. People who developed a love of learning. If David's teachers had similar goals, they must be extremely pleased, as David definitely was a lifelong learner. He lived and loved to learn. He not only learned, he taught. When I conversed with David, I always left knowing something new and perhaps a different perspective. With David, it was like, pick a topic, and he was right there. Current events, science, humor, sports, you name it. He always had some new information or new perspective on the ideas. I know at times he adjusted for my limited understanding, but that's what a good teacher does. David made time for others to catch up. He never spoke in a condescending tone, even when he obviously knew so much more. That's more than a teacher, that's a friend. I have no doubt that many of you had similar experiences and knowledge of Dave. He was sure he gave enough of himself to give to others. And funny, if you haven't seen Laugh with Shander disc, I would highly recommend you do so. Yes, a stand-up comic, but also a fun guy to have dinner with and a great guy to have known. For me, David was one of the good guys that the world was lucky enough to have had as a guest. Thank you.
Finally, I'd like to call up David's son, Bill.
I've known David since 1968. No, I'm just. I'm actually going to take us back to Brooklyn to get us started. My father used to tell this story when he was about 7 or 8. His Aunt Sadie took him to the deli because the rabbi was coming over for brunch. And so it was an important day. They go to the deli and she goes to Sam, the proprietor, and she says, "Sam, how much is the lox?" Sam says, and I can't do the accents, $4.95 a pound. And she says, "Oh, good, Walt. All right, well, big day, rabbi's coming. Yes, please give me your best, Sam." So Sam breaks out a giant 10-pound side of salmon. And he breaks out his fillet knife and he slices a beautiful cut of salmon, drops it on the wax paper, and cuts another slice, puts it down on the wax paper, cuts a third slice, puts it on the wax paper. He looks up. She's like, "Yes. Cut. All right, okay." Cuts another slice, third slice, looks up. "Please keep going. Cut, she says. Cuts another slice. He keeps going. He cuts like half the salmon away. He's like, $4.95 a pound, he reminds her every now and then. He's like, "Yeah, cut. Until finally she says, "Oh, yes, that piece." So Dad loved a good joke. Yes, his favorite, I think, might have been the pretzel joke, as we've heard referenced a couple times. I'm also not going to tell that one. He loved a good joke. That one maybe wasn't his favorite, but I think he considered it an audience favorite. I say that from my own personal experience because I think I heard that joke more than any other joke that he told over the years. So I think it's appropriate for us here today. So, Karen, I want to start off by saying the entire family loves you. We're really glad that you and my dad found each other. You two shared an amazing life together. And we know how much you brought to his life, and we're really glad, and we know how much he brought to yours as well. We're all really happy to have been able to spend time with you, with him, and now that he's passed. So I also want to say that I'm here representing my sister, Shander, who's here, and our other sister, Katie, who, as was mentioned earlier, recently passed away. Katie will be missed for many reasons, not least of which is that she is the one who, if she were here, would have regaled you all with many, many, many stories, because she had something that Shander and I unfortunately lack. I think we inherited this from our father, actually, is we actually don't have very good memories. You know, my father had a great memory for like facts. He was all really good at cardiology and all the rest of it, but couldn't remember like what happened yesterday, maybe. And so Katie would have had all that. So we can't do that. But what we can do, it's okay, is we can talk to you about maybe feelings, memories. So the favorite quote, my wife Becky's favorite quote of all time from Maya Angelou: "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And I can tell you, Shander and I have some feelings that we do remember from our past. So one of my fondest memories from my childhood, and I think about this all the time, was going skiing with my father. And it's not that I remember a particular trip or a particular turn or him teaching me how to ski, which he did. What I remember is really more of that vague idea of a feeling. And there are two specific sort of components to that. One is I definitely remember sitting in the car with him, driving up I-70, and Neil Diamond would be blasting on the CD player. And then the memory shifts to us sitting on the chairlift, just sort of gazing up at the top of the mountain, not talking, just anticipating the next run. And that felt really nice. And one of Shander's best memories is when she graduated college. She graduated summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa. She got that from Dad, I think. And she got our father a Phi Beta Kappa key because she knew that he didn't have one, even though he had also earned that honor. She says that's probably the single best father-daughter moment they ever had. And he was really proud of her. And it wasn't just a momentary thing. He loved to tell that story, and he always beamed with pride when he did. And Shander gets to take that feeling with her for the rest of her life. And by the way, even though I don't really remember my childhood that well, I do have memories sort of by proxy, because we have photo albums full of reminders of our childhood, all these significant things that happened. For instance, I don't remember the event when my father threw my sisters in the garbage can, which, by the way, is in the slideshow, so keep your eyes open for it. But we have that photo that he took memorializing it, so it's almost like I remember it for myself. And I'm not really sure how it worked out that way because, we live 2,000 miles apart, and yet there are so many important moments that he captured on film. So he was much more involved in our lives than you would expect from, divorced dad living halfway across the country. In large part, yes, we did live our lives physically distant from each other. And wow, did he live a life. Shander, Katie, and I wrote his obituary after he passed. Well, we didn't really write it. We plagiarized it from his own words that he had written for one of his medical school reunions. He had an incredible list of accomplishments in medicine. In addition to the scholarships, degrees, fellowships, and leadership positions, which we've heard some of today, he did a lot of other things you may or may not be aware of. For instance, did you know that he pursued an electronic medical records startup back in the 80s? Little card that was meant to hold up your entire medical record. He co-wrote a book, and many of you do know, it's already been mentioned today, that he was a lifelong student of astronomy, and then he volunteered at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. But let me tell you how deep that interest in astronomy went. One day, I'm sitting at home, I'm reading Scientific American, which I only have because he gifted me the subscription to it. And I'm sort of glancing through the letters to the editor. Lo and behold, there's a letter from David Shander, MD, Denver, Colorado. I'm like, okay, it's the right, David Shander, all right. And so there'd been this article in the previous month about some esoteric astronomical phenomenon. I can't remember what it was, and to be honest, I half understood it because those physics and astronomy articles are very intense. And so the best part about this letter to the editor was that my father was critiquing the article. Okay, he was schooling the PhD astronomer who had written this thing on something he hadn't gotten quite right. Which brings up a couple of important things. Number one, Dad was one of those people who would write letters to the editor. Okay, not everybody does that. We found a lot of letters to the editor that he'd written, stuffed in the pages of magazines in his office. Two, he was someone whose letters got published. Okay, I know of many times his letters got published in Cyan and in other publications. He made well-written, cogent points that the editors valued, and they really couldn't ignore it. Number three, he got responses. Okay, it's very rare, but sometimes in Scientific American, there reply to those letters, and this was one of those times. The editors went back to the author of the article, and the guy actually kind of agreed with what my father had said, this very nuanced point. And they sort of articulated why they'd done what they'd done, sort of like making excuses for themselves, like, oh, we know what you're saying is right, but here's why we said it this way. So, to say that my father was smart and accomplished and a Renaissance man is definitely to undersell it. Another thing that can't be skipped over is his love of travel. He and Karen saw the world together, literally. They went to dozens of countries around the world. A lot of the United States, especially in recent years when travel was more difficult. They and we three kids, and sometimes the grandkids, got to go on a lot of amazing trips with them as well. There are endless memories from these trips, like the time, and this was just a trip with me, Karen, and Dad. I remember it was Lake Powell. It was August, and if you've ever been to Lake Powell in August, it's warm, And for some reason, we brought ramen. I don't know what thought. We love ramen as kids. That's probably why. And so we were eating ramen, but it was so hot. We were standing chest deep in Lake Powell, eating ramen like this because it was excruciating, but it was great. And that's really one of his greatest legacies to me is his love of travel. Becky and I organize our whole lives around our trips, and I hope that doesn't change for a long time. Dad was also a very serious person. But he was also fun. He could be the most serious and professional person in the room, as many of you have told us. But he was also the kind of guy who would get on the floor and play with the grandkids. And he could be downright silly, to be honest. For instance, did you know that he referred to my sister Shander as Shana Punham, or Poonboon for short? Or my other sister Katie was Kate the Schmate, and also sometimes known as Tushuk Tiny. So those of you who speak Yiddish, you'll know what that means. And I had probably the most impressive nickname of all, maybe I'm a little biased, but my nickname was Hendy, Schmendy, Stinky Small, Rotten Tiny Cute Zeus. And there was a little song that went with that, by the way, which, by the way, Brooke, that's why you have a little song with your nickname. So yes, and as you also have heard, he did stand-up comedy. He was a performer, he was a teacher, and he was a storyteller. And for a cardiologist, he had a surprisingly lenient attitude toward nutrition. So we've already heard from Bob, his last meal was Nathan's hot dogs. That's pretty impressive. But I think I can one-up that a little bit, and Rabbi Ben alluded to this at the beginning. You know, how many of you have an iPhone? Or you're familiar with the iPhone? Yes, we all know what the iPhone is. So the iPhone has, you know, little icons for all the apps. And at the bottom of the iPhone, there are the 4 primary apps. Usually it's like the big things you use all day long: email, web browser, messaging, the most important apps. Guess what app he had at the bottom? Darn right. Those, you know, the camera people, McDonald's. That was a top 4 app in his life, okay? So for those of you who don't know, every single day for years, my father had an Egg McMuffin every morning, to the point where Karen, on the way home from the gym, would stop at McDonald's, pulling up to the drive-thru, and she would pull up and say, you know, person would say, "Oh, Karen, just from hearing your voice, you want the regular?" So, Dad will be missed. He'll be missed by Karen, by me and Shander, by his 6 grandkids, his cousins, niece and nephew, his friends, his colleagues in medicine, those at the museum, and Ollie. McDonald's will miss the consistent revenue stream that he provided. It would have warmed his heart to hear all of the nice things that people have said about them. And I think he'd be proud to hear that I've worked my way up to an Egg McMuffin a week.
As a rabbi, I had never had an Egg McMuffin until I shared one with David. One of my favorite things about this job is being able to actually stand up here and look out at everybody else while we're sharing stories about people that we love. You get to see the smiles, you get to see the little lights on everybody's face as you look out across the room. I am so grateful to be here. Thank you, thank you. And thank all of you. I want us to embrace the fullness of this moment as we share our laughter and our tears and weave together the rich tapestry that was David's life. Each story we recall, each memory we hold in our hearts adds a new thread to that tapestry, keeping David's spirit vibrantly alive in our midst. David was a blessing to all of us. His life was a journey filled with love, challenges, joys, and lessons that touch each of us in profound ways. We remember not just the echo of his laughter or the wisdom of his words, but the quiet strength that he showed, the love he gave freely, and the light he brought into our lives. Those of you who wish, I invite you to recite the Mourner's Kaddish. There's a few copies around on the chairs, otherwise I think we're going to get put up on the teleprompter thingy as well. And if you don't know, it's okay. Zoom in. Yit Gedal. Oh, you may rise if you feel like rising. If you feel like singing. Yit Gedal, Yit Gedash, Shmei Rabbah. Be'alma dibrach yirte, yanlich machute, v'chayechon yomechon, v'chaye tekol beit Yisrael, v'gala v'zman kari, v'imru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah me'barach be'olam me'almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitlaman v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yithaleh v'yithalal, Shmei d'kudsha b'richu, ve'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechilata, Damiram Dhamma, Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya, Mechanim Aleinu v'al Kol Yisrael, Amen. Say Shalom b'nama, Huya say Shalom, Aleinu v'al Kol Yisrael, v'al Kol Yishbotenu, Amen. May the source of peace bring peace to all who mourn and comfort to all who are bereaved, among us and everywhere. Amen. You may be seated. We began the service today with a simple utterance, Zichronam Livracha, may David's memory be a blessing. But this is more than just a phrase. It's a hope, a prayer, and a commitment. It's an intention that our memories of David will continue to inspire us. It's a prayer that we find comfort in the legacy he leaves behind. And it's a commitment to carry forward the values and passions that he held dear. As we move forward, let us carry David's spirit in our hearts and in our actions. Let us honor his memory in our lives with the same kindness, courage, and love that he exemplified. In doing so, we ensure that David's light continues to shine, guiding us and future generations. May you find peace in your memories, strength in your community, and comfort in the knowledge that love never truly leaves us. It lives on in the stories we share, the lives we touch, and the love we continue to give. Amen. To conclude, I'd like to bring up Karen to say a few final words.
It feels so good to be here with family and friends. And I want to thank all of you here, and also those of you who are joining us via live stream, for coming together to celebrate David's remarkable life. I invite you to continue the celebration. We have a reception in the next door here in the family room. So please continue to celebrate with more stories and things about David. I'd like to close with a poem. David was passionate about astronomy. So this poem by Shakespeare from Romeo and Juliet is a tribute to his life and love. When he shall die, take him and cut him out in little stars, and he shall make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will be in love with night and pay no worship to the garish sun. I love you, David.
Please join us next door. Thank you all for coming.
I got it.